Hey, what's up guys, I'm Josh, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Diana PHIs from Abyss. This is a very premium headphone coming in at a scorching $4,000. They do have a Diana PHI V2, which has, from the best of my knowledge, very similar build, but slightly different tuning. That's actually $1,000 less, coming in at $3,000. Now, Abyss was actually kind enough to lend this to me for a review. But first in this video, I want to talk a little bit about the unboxing experience and give you my first impressions of this headphone. Now, Abyss, similar to a company like Odyssey and Grado, are made in USA products. So, right away they have a special place in all of our hearts here in America, I think. They tend to do things very differently. And perhaps their most famous headphone is the Abyss 1266, which is just a ridiculous looking headphone. It doesn't really look like anything else in the market. I actually heard that at RMAF a long time ago. Can't really remember much about the sound signature, unfortunately, but you have probably already seen a video from like Linus Tech Tips where he cried on camera about it. But we're not here to talk about that today. We're here to talk about this. So one of the things that I find fascinating about Abyss is how differently they handle every product that they make. Nothing really looks like anything else on the market, and the PHI is a perfect example of that. We're going to talk about the quality of the build in a second, but if you kind of just look at this thing, like compared to the standard repertoire of headphones in a $4,000 market, it doesn't seem to be copying or influenced by any other design. Now, it also kind of reminds me of something out of the old school Star Treks. So a bit of what would kind of be seen in a way of like a futuristic model, but a futuristic model that was made in the past. So you know how those movies like Blade Runner had this styling for the future that doesn't look anything like the future now, but it looks futuristic for a vision back then. It's like future retro type stuff. That's kind of what this reminds me of. And I think a big reason for this styling kind of giving me that retro futuristic grade style influence is like the angle of this specific bracket here. It's just got like a Star Trek-y style angle to it. You also notice that there are some decisions that they made here that I don't necessarily think were great decisions, but they are very different than other things you would see on the market, like minimal padding on the headband, and honestly, a impressively slim design for a really powerful planar magnetic headphone. And that is just a hair thicker than some modern day phones. So a little bit more on the build here. This grill here is actually supposed to be a Fibonacci spiral. To me, it has looked and always will look like a flower. It looks kind of like a, I don't know, flower on your head. Don't know why, it's always struck me as that. Now the unboxing experience is actually pretty typical until you get to the actual carry case for the headphones, which is this canvas bag. And it's not some cheap Fallout 76 canvas bag either. It's like an actual legitimate canvas with leather accents bags with this like double zipper design that opens up this tab so that you can bring out the headphones from inside. And Abyss is definitely going for a more boutique headphone experience. In fact, they actually use the word boutique in the back of the box for this headphone. And I think they achieved that, especially with additions like this, this box here. Now it also comes with a cable, which is got a much more custom feel to the cable than a lot of headphones have. And that's actually not a bad thing. It's a really well-made cable. I asked for a short XLR cable, and then the other side terminates to a 2.5 millimeter that are proprietary towards the left and right side. And there's actually a slight coloration difference between the right side and the left side. Inside the cable, there's blue wires on the left and kind of a yellowish orange copper color on the right. So once you finally pull these out of the bag, you get the headphones, which are shockingly well built. If you picked up a pair of these, you really don't expect kind of what you pick up. They're not heavy, but they do feel incredibly solid, and a lot of that has to do with the actual chassis for it. So this chassis, from the top of the headband expander down to the bottom of this, is actually one solid piece of machined aluminum. The machining on this is very nice, and the powder coating is really great as well. And then you open up the magnetic pads to see the other side, where you can kind of see through this slightly transparent driver. And when you really get down and look closely at this thing, you start to see how the tolerances are really, really high. The machining on this is exceptional, like really, really good. Probably the best I've seen on a headphone. Now the headphone expansion here does have this carbon fiber layer on the outside, and it does feel solid for each level, and it only has 4 different levels, and then you kind of max it out. Now, some quick notes on the build here. I have a medium-sized head, and for smaller heads, I actually don't think this headphone is really gonna fit because I don't expand this at all, and it pretty much fits pretty much exactly where I think it should, but it does leave quite a bit of top-end room if you wanna expand this all the way if you do have a taller head. Now, I do think we should talk a little bit about the actual fit of this because it's not like a lot of other headphones. A lot of headphones have this clamp to them. And the closest thing that I can kind of equate this to is the HD 800 style of fit. That headphone, in some ways, it kind of just rests on your head. There's a little bit of a clamp, but it's not much. It's just kind of resting there. You feel like if you shake it too much, it's gonna fly off. This actually has a similar kind of head feel to it. And the pads are also something that you definitely have to get used to the fit and feel of them. For me, they're kind of loose on the bottom here. But what's also kind of interesting is that this is definitely not a headphone that requires any strong amount of seal on your head. So it just kind of sits there. I have a little bit of pressure up here, kind of right above my ear at the temple level. And some people I know do complain about a hot spot on the top of their head. Although I wore this for quite a few hours yesterday and I didn't really get a hot spot, but that's not an area that I normally get a hot spot for any headphone. Okay, so the overall fit of this is unfortunately not that good. And there are some modifications that Abyss does sell with this headphone, like they have slightly different pads, and I believe they have a comfort strap that goes on the headphone, if I'm not mistaken. And that stuff is supposed to be on its way here for the actual review, though I don't have it yet. And that might be something I recommend. But right now the comfort is just, I don't know, there's nothing about it that particularly screams super comfortable to me. But the reason why I say it has a lot of potential is because it's actually a really lightweight headphone. And being a big, powerful planar headphone, that is on the lighter weight side, but still really, really well built. In fact, possibly even best in class. There's a lot of potential for it to get really good, but it's not quite there. So powering this headphone, and we'll talk more about this when I do the actual review, it actually does need a fair bit of power. And that's where something like this is gonna come in very handy, which is a tube hybrid amplifier that spits out quite a bit of power, and it sounds quite good doing it. Now, quick note on power here, I don't wanna blow it out of proportion. I've done some testing with some amps here. If you have something like a 789 or an 887 or anything of that caliber of power, that's going to be more than enough for this. It's not something that you have to hook up to like a speaker amp or anything like that. And that will bring us into our discussion about sound. I think the first thing that stands out to me when I listen to this is the capability of the center image. And I know this seems weird, and I'm specifically not calling it a center image necessarily, but instead the capability of the center image. And let me explain. A lot of headphones will take a very finite center image and they can have this really small kind of ball in your head. And if a headphone has a really finite ball and is very capable within that ball, it's considered good imaging, right? And that is true. It is good imaging by what I would consider it to be. Now, what this does differently than a lot of headphones is it can have a very small pinpoint center image, but it can also have a very well-defined, broader center image. Now, this might seem on the surface level undesirable, but I actually think this is very cool, and let me explain why. So if you have a very small kind of a sound that is supposed to seem very finite, think like Bubbles from Yoshi Hirakawa, right? There's a lot of these very crisp, incredibly small sounds that are supposed to be happening in very specific places. This can display that. But then you're gonna listen to another song that is gonna have more broad delivery for either an instrument or a vocalist, but it's meant to sound wide. It's meant to sound big. And this can do that, and a lot of headphones can do that, but what separates this from those is its ability to kind of make the boundaries of that instrument, even if it's a broader center image, very clear. So think of it like a balloon, and the bigger that the balloon blows up, the less refined the edges of it are. Well, this seems to be able to maintain the same edge on everything, which is very impressive. And this is immediately the first thing that stood out to me. But unfortunately, this is also the thing that I think is gonna make the least amount of sense. And I don't want this to sound like a downside because I actually think it's a big upside and a very impressive part of this. Now, further on the soundstage, some things that I have noticed so far is that it is very oriented towards right and left. Listen to a very wide soundstaging album like Amber Rubarth's Sessions from the 17th Ward. That whole album is very wide and very like left and right directional. And that type of music is right up this thing's alley. But it is a little bit weak in terms of forward representation from, a little bit larger scale music that needs a little bit more forward depth. It doesn't really have a whole lot of that kind of out in front of you feel like something like an Aria would. Now, the second thing that popped out to me was the detail retrieval. The details on this are pretty insane. And I'm coming from a headphone that I actually consider to be one of the most detailed headphones that I've ever heard, the HE1000 SE. And that is going to have its own separate review that has either come out before or shortly after this video will. That's an insanely detailed headphone, and to have something like this come out and be pretty close to that and really just insane recovery for information is very impressive. So to put this in perspective, this is significantly more detailed in my opinion, especially in the top end and mid-range, than something like an LCD4 or an Empyrean. This has much more detail and much more information than either of those headphones. Now, in terms of the headphones that I have heard for detail retrieval, I think I'm gonna place this at number 2. It's very good. The amount of information that you can gather from this is not only different than a lot of other headphones, but is quite substantial in terms of the amount of stuff that you're getting for what this is able to display. Now, I will have more of an explanation in the review of what types of information it's displaying and why it's so detailed and where it is so detailed and where it's not as detailed as some other headphones. But just know for now, it's pretty insane in that category. The last thing I want to talk about in the first impressions is the bass response. This is something that I think the V2, the slightly cheaper version of this is, well, it's $1,000 cheaper, but it's still $3,000. So the cheaper version of this is supposed to have a different tuning that is going to be a little bit warmer. And I actually think that I'm going to personally prefer that one, but not everybody will. The bass response on here is good. It's very fast and again, very detailed, but it's not going to be as strong as some other planars that are on the market, even at significantly lower price ranges. Just to kind of compare this to a headphone that is probably the most accessible to the most amount of people, the strength of the bass response in terms of the amount is very on par with something like a Sundara. Now, quality and placement are very different, and when you get into those sorts of things, that's really what you're paying for. So it's notable that I'm not calling it equivalent to the Sundara, but in terms of the amount that's being pushed forward, it reminds me a lot of the Sundara. It's a fair bit, it's nice, it's not a substantial kind of kick you in the face type of bass response that you can get with some other planars. Okay, so I think that's gonna wrap it up for the actual sound first impressions. I actually have a lot of thoughts about this, but I don't wanna spoil everything for the review because I find this to be a very fascinating headphone. Okay guys, so that's gonna wrap it up from my end. On your end, if you could let me know any comments you have about this first impressions or about this headphone and any questions you might have for the review, and I'll see if I can get to them in that video. All right guys, thank you very much for watching. Until the next video, my name is Josh, signing off.